Cocaine Cowboys, the deadly rise of Ireland's drug lords. The live show is on sale now. We're on the road on February 10th at the Lime Tree Theatre in Limerick, February 15th in Cork's Everyman Theatre, and on Sunday 18th, we're back at Dublin's 3 Olympia. April takes us to Galway's Town Hall Theatre, Killarney's INEC, and Belfast's Waterfront Studios. Check mcd.ie or venue for ticket sales. Never ask, are we being recorded in a studio? Because yes, you are. And the microphones are always on. So you have to be very careful what you're speaking about.
Well, you know me.
Do you know, like when we're in here on our own and we start talking shite, can I say? Because we do talk a serious amount of shite.
Yeah.
And I always forget. And then I realise it's blasting out all over the second floor.
Yeah, it is a big concern. It's some of the stuff you say. Am I allowed to speak about your... brush with the law, no? Am I?
Listen, I'll have to go down and pay for that.
Well, you know, the crime, it was... we obviously speak a lot about crime, you may have noticed, and I was a witness to a severe criminal act just today when a certain high-profile reporting lady, who cannot be named for legal reasons, walked out of a shop without paying for a coffee.
Yeah, I was so distracted.
Yeah.
But how do you pay for that coffee anyway?
You just go back and say, I didn't...
Where do you pay for it?
I don't know.
How many times have you done it?
I've done it a couple of times, yeah.
Yeah, no, this is Super Value on Talbot Street and I'm coming back to pay for it.
Yeah, one of the most...
I didn't mean to do it.
A further outbreak of the crime wave of Talbot Street.
I know, we are friends, us and the Super Value on Talbot Street and all the rest of it, but they have a machine at the door.
Yeah.
And like, are you supposed to make your coffee and then go and queue and pay for it?
Yeah, you are.
Oh,
yeah.
That would have annoyed me anyway.
Even very famous people like yourself have to pay for their coffee.
It's the first time I've ever done that. I'm just going to say I usually go to the counter, but there was nobody at the counter. So a much more notorious criminal than me.
Well...
is
for the moment anyway.
For the moment is Liam. Imagine I was on crime.
It would be a good. It would do well. It would be a highly rated, wouldn't it?
Anyway, Liam Byrne doesn't look the happiest in these photographs, you know. So he's been extradited back to the UK. He's lost his case completely in Spain, and he's back in cold old Britain.
He's back in cold Britain. Confirmed, I suppose, really yesterday that he's going to face. He's going to face trial, where if he was found guilty, he would almost definitely serve a lengthy prison sentence. I mean, I think there's no doubt about that. And if you look at it, it's actually 2 decades since he was in that position. Obviously he's been through cab proceedings, all those sort of civil proceedings and, you know, various other matters, but it's actually 2 decades since he's been before court in that manner.
And in custody.
Well, he was in custody, obviously, in Spain, pending this. But
for this case, it's the first time in custody in 20 years.
Well, he was in, it is. He obviously served a lengthy prison sentence. I think it was 4 years for an assault on a former footballer following a sort of row. And the case was actually quite dramatic at the time, when you heard the level of witness intimidation that occurred and there was allegations of attempts to pay people off. And really since then, Liam Byrne has lived a charmed life.
Hasn't he just?
I mean, if you look at it, obviously the terrible tragedy in terms of losing his brother to violence, but on a personal level, he spent 20 years during that time. Nearly every one of his closest associates have ended up in prison. Some of them have ended up dead. Nearly all of his rivals have ended up in prison or dead. All of the people that were on the other side of the Crumlin-Drimnagh feud nearly came to a bad end. His cousins like Liam Brannigan, Fat Freddie Thompson, they all were constantly or have ended up in prison, and he managed to avoid it.
And charmed lifestyle indeed, because of course his home in Raleigh Square, which was seized by the Criminal Assets Bureau, and when is that going up for sale? But anyway, that house was, refurbished to the tune of 750,000. He had his own personal bar, there was a jacuzzi, there was a playground on the roof of it, etc. The family enjoyed holidays in Mallorca, in Calador region, which is a very sort of exclusive part of Mallorca, where Bomber Kavanagh had a house and where the Byrnes holidayed. I'm not sure of the ownership of the house they holidayed in, but no doubt it's under investigation as well. Holidayed there. They were forever going to Cancun in Mexico, which is another favourite place of theirs. Up to a month they'd spend there. Jet setting around the world, first class, always driving the absolute best of the best of vehicles, and basically moving with mansion to mansion. And obviously the death of his brother has been very traumatic for him. And he was there the day David Byrne was shot dead. And I think he walked past his body in the lobby of that hotel because he was photographed just outside very shortly after it. Of course, the two brothers, David Byrne when he was alive and Liam, spent a lot of time in Spain on the Costa del Sol in the heyday of that area for the Irish with their father, James Jaws Byrne. And really, until things went wrong after 2016, they were hanging out with Conor McGregor. They were jet setting off to Vegas whenever they wanted. They were in...
I mean, I think Liam Byrne, and even up until very recently, seemed to attend every Liverpool away Champions League match, for example. He would have, and he was regularly pictured through social media at these matches. So he lived a kind of a funny life, didn't he? I mean, even up until recently, he was in a video with Stephen Gerrard. He obviously moved in other circles.
Explain that for anybody who didn't see that.
I mean, there was certainly one video where Liam Byrne and Stephen Gerrard were obviously out for a night, and Liam Byrne obviously shot a video for a man of no involvement in crime. He shot a video of him and Stephen Gerrard basically wishing him well. But I mean, at this point, the fact he was a criminal was a well-established fact in the High Court. The cab hearings had been heard. He'd been named, obviously, as the second in command of the Byrne organised crime group. But despite all of that, and despite the fact that Bomber Kavanagh, his brother-in-law, had gone to prison, and he was clearly under investigation, Stephen Gerrard was still hanging out with him. Obviously, their
kids were friends, I think.
The kids are in a relationship. Yeah. So, but he was living again. He was one of these guys who, like the old mafia figures in the US, who seem to be able to exist in two worlds at the same time. Where they can exist in that underworld, where they had a very, very feared reputation, not just in Ireland but in the UK. But they also seem to be able to move in these circles, and you'd see them in the best of places in the UK, race meetings, and obviously then ultimately in Dubai as well.
Liam Byrne is a bully.
Yeah,
I mean, he's notoriously a bully. He takes what he wants, even if it's not his to take. He has been known to be very violent, to lose his temper. The day the Criminal Assets Bureau took a saw to the door, to the bullet-resistant door of his house, he was incensed with anger. And, a number of people had said to me that he was actually almost foaming at the mouth.
Yeah.
He was so angry as they picked through his things, because they were his things and he had earned them.
Yeah.
What they found there that day was, diamonds, watches, a betting slip, I think, showing that one wager alone was 40,000.
Yeah.
A collection of shoes in his son's bedroom, which was just mind-boggling. And a lot of football memorabilia he had hanging up in his house. He, at one point, had a car business which was described as basically a money-washing scam for the Kinahan organisation. But apart from that, he's never had a job in his life.
No, and he did earn even as a young sort of teenager, he had that reputation because he's not a big guy. He's a small little fella, really. But he had a reputation of being a bully, of being somebody who used threats of violence very quickly and very easily. And of course, from a young teenager, he had those connections that were able to give him that backup that enabled him to act like that. And he really traded on that. I mean, it wasn't, him in itself that earned that. I mean, that was coming on the back of the fact that people like Bomber Kavanagh were there in the background. I mean, even in the early 90s, Bomber was a very feared figure in the Dublin underworld. Had a very rapid rise using the same sort of tactics of, really instilling fear in people. So Liam Byrne was a bully, and he learned to be a bully as a teenager, where he could threaten people knowing that he had all of these things behind him. In later times, as it all started to gradually unravel, and I think it probably did unravel gradually, didn't it? As even in Ireland, their operation, as more and more people kind of ended up in prison, a lot of them to do with those plots to kill members of the Hutch clan, that he was persisting with his bullying. And I think you wrote about how he was still being basically collecting debts or being used to phone people up and make those threats and try and earn money in that way.
I don't think he was being used to do that. I think he was doing it very willingly and
even taking on other people's debts and using his reputation to.
Or maybe other people's names were put forward as they know the debt as opposed to his, because of course he knew that at that point in the UK, Bomber Kavanagh was under investigation in a proceeds of crime case.
Yeah.
And that will come to court actually soon. I must check up on that, because they will demand money from him to pay that. And if he doesn't pay it, he'll get even extra time in prison. But yeah, Liam Byrne had made a phone call and at one point said to a businessman, "I'm Liam Byrne. Do you know who I fucking am? Google me."
Yeah.
Yeah. But another aspect of him, which I always thought was interesting, because he is one of those sort of peculiar people, that are so violent, and yet is such a family man.
Yeah,
he is a staunch family man, and the Byrne family are very close, tight knit.
Yeah,
Sadie's his mother, James Jaws Byrne is his father. They lived around the corner from him. He never moved away from not only his neighbourhood but his actual road. And opposite them lived Sean McGovern and his brother David Byrne before he passed away. His sister lived round the corner.
Yeah.
He himself has been in a relationship with Simone McEnroe for years.
Yeah.
They not only have a boy who's now in his 20s, but they have a younger children as well. So they kind of had two families nearly together.
Yeah.
And they are very together. You never hear of Liam Byrne being sort of accused of being a womanizer or being a big drinker or anything.
No,
He's a family man who's actually, I don't believe he drinks.
Yeah, no, I think that's always said about him, as it is said about a few gangland figures actually, but that he was very clean living. And there's obviously a whole other swathe of people involved in that world that are heavy cocaine users and wild partying types. But Liam Byrne doesn't seem to have been that. He's more of a sort of he was clearly very focused on the financial aspect of it, where you have other people blowing their money. I think that tight-knit family structure is what's needed for these guys, and that allowed him probably to survive longer, to have those people around that could be trusted.
And I say that about the family, being a family man, but a lot of members of his family are notorious criminals.
Yeah. I mean, like David Byrne himself, who was killed, of course, didn't have a lot of convictions at all, but he was a very significant player in that organisation as well, and somebody who worked very closely with his brother in that business. Obviously, he was never convicted of these offences, but, they had... they amassed a huge amount of wealth, didn't they? In probably between that over a 10-year period up until 2016 or whatever, maybe slightly shorter, they really became the absolute dominant force, certainly in Dublin. along with Bomber Kavanagh, like that kind of those areas of West Dublin and South Dublin in particular, we probably even didn't write so much about it, but places like Tala, they had a number of these kind of client drug dealers who they were wholesaling to, and there really was nobody else largely who could compete with them.
Well, maybe they kept them at bay because they definitely were just so notoriously violent. I mean, there was a period of time there that journalists were being told not to go anywhere near the area of Crumlin where they were, which was their fortress, Anyway, we're talking about him because he's back in the UK and he's going to be before the court. So he's in custody and he will remain, I imagine, in custody until this case comes before the Old Bailey. Well, he's due into the Old Bailey on the 8th of January. That will probably just be...
Yeah, probably it won't be a full hearing at that point, you wouldn't think.
They might put the charges to him if they haven't already. Maybe they put the charges to him.
I think they have to put it actually to get the extradition, don't they? But they probably put them formally in a court setting. Put them formally
in court setting, yeah. So 43 years of age, and the charges he's facing, because these are kind of, if you were a gloater, you might think they got their comeuppance, this crowd, out of what happened here. But the charges he's facing are around firearms.
Yeah. Well, it's a very complicated story, isn't it? Like it is a bizarre one. And of course, we haven't heard the full details of it because it's not gone to full hearing. But I mean, the summary of what we know so far could basically be categorised as Bomber Kavanagh is currently serving a 21-year sentence, is it? And
on a guilty plea.
On a guilty plea for drug trafficking
offences. Don't you?
Yeah, which is a huge sentence. Massive. And it shows what Liam Byrne could face. But as part of his dealings with the UK government, he seems to have offered up some firearms that he had access to. And maybe, as we probably spoke about before, in a typical kind of gangland way, there's always the mentality, you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. There's always a deal to be done and, everybody can sort of be a winner. And he basically offered up these weapons and said he could arrange for them to be found or something along those lines through his associates, including, it is alleged, Liam Byrne. And instead, the UK cops seem to have said, yeah, okay, that sounds interesting. Got the weapons and then charged him with the possession of the weapons, basically. And Liam Byrne is, some of the evidence against him seems to involve EncroChat hacks into, his knowledge of these weapons or this general conspiracy. And that's seems to be the broad thrust of it, that they're going to link him to what they say are EncroChat messages showing he has knowledge and a degree of control over the movement of these weapons.
I had a good look back over the Bomber Kavanagh stuff that I did last night. In actual fact, we might put up the fall of Bomber Kavanagh over the Christmas as a repost, because it was a really good insight into him and where he'd come from. But so it was January of 2017, that the weapons were found in Dublin belonging to Bomber Kavanagh's outfit.
Belonged to Bomber Kavanagh's outfit. And one of the people, obviously, who would eventually go to prison for that was a guy called Jonathan Harding, who really was Liam Byrne's kind of number two. He was really Liam Byrne's gopher, as how it was described to me. And we had a story back in 2010 when Jonathan Harding was arrested after a rocket launcher was imported from Spain. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
Jonathan Harding earned the moniker Rocket Man as a result. But even then, that was all meant to have been arranged by Liam Byrne. And then 7 years later, Jonathan Harding was subsequently done for the Green Oak. And that probably weapons find, which is, I don't even want to attempt to name all the weapons, but it was a staggering amount.
It was huge. It was more than 20 weapons, some of them semi-automatic weapons. It was in the, right in the height of the Kinahan-Hutch feud. And the weapons were described as being primed and ready for use on the streets of Dublin.
Yeah.
Now, when the Gardaí raided Green Oak and they arrested Mr. Nobody and Jonathan Harding and various other people like that, they found a bill of ladling, which was basically the transport document. And that document was given to the NCA in the UK, who then began to investigate Bomber Kavanagh and what he was doing. And they discovered that, they basically discovered this setup that he was importing drugs across Europe using this modified machinery.
Yeah.
And then he was transporting the cash back out to pay for them. He had set up these sort of fake companies in these warehousing and was running hundreds of thousands of cocaine in all the time, right? But when they looked back in this company, so they actually basically conducted a sting in Dover.
Yeah.
And they caught the gang with the drugs. They raided these warehouses and they were able to then go backwards and see how many of these same sort of supply routes had been used. They were able to see when that warehouse was rented. I found it extraordinary because it was all got underway literally weeks after David Byrne was murdered.
Yeah.
So Bomber Kavanagh was back in business while grieving.
Yeah.
You know, and while coming together with Daniel Kinahan for retribution of that murder. But so he, as the investigation continued with the NCA after the Dover bust, they arrested some of his underlings.
Yeah.
But they didn't arrest Bomber.
Yeah.
And Bomber was always very careful on the phones and all the rest of it. And he reckoned he was step away and he wasn't going to get done for it.
Yeah.
So the sort of underlings are obviously going to be charged. There's files sent to the state prosecutors. Bomber reckons he's home and dry until they arrest him and they put to him questions. Yeah. And he realises, shit, they have me too.
Yeah.
And it's at that point, around the 2020 mark, that you see the seizure of the weapons up in Newry.
Yeah.
So it's at that point when he realises he's probably headed for jail too. He starts to try and scramble in efforts to negate the sentence.
Yeah, his fight becomes, not that I'm not going to be guilty, but that he's trying to downplay it. It wasn't,
They reckon if they hand up these weapons, if he hands up these weapons, they'll go easier on him.
Yeah, and he pleads guilty to a limited amount of drug trafficking rather than this kind of broader, huge drug trafficking.
He fought a lot against that as well through the courts about how guilty he was going to be. Held a kind of a Newton hearing thing, it was called, which was a trial within a trial. So anyway, in the middle of this plot on EncroChat phones is the NCA will say Liam Byrne and Bomber's son Jack Kavanagh, who's still fighting extradition from Spain, but who is probably likely to be returned in the same way Liam Byrne has to England. Another part of the forest, Padder Keating, who would be Bomber Kavanagh's number 2 here in Ireland, who's currently serving a 10-year jail term for directing a criminal organisation. He was accused of directing a plot to kill James Mago Gately. He's wanted too as part of the conspiracy. So he must have been up on an EncroChat phone, or he must have been some way linked to those guns in Newry as well, because the Irish courts are going to hand him over to the UK.
They are, and he's been obviously charged in the UK, so he's not been charged in Ireland for his role in this plot. So one can presume it has to be EncroChat.
It'd be interesting to see if it's an EncroChat phone, because of course we were told that no Irish criminals were using EncroChat phones, and that's why the Gardaí didn't do anything with the EncroChat information.
Yeah, look, Liam Byrne is Irish and he seems to be on EncroChat anyway.
Exactly, even though he's based in the UK. So that's Liam, 43, first Christmas behind bars for a long time. Yeah. First time presumably as a father behind bars.
Yeah.
For Christmas. And he was escorted back to the UK by a team of officers from the NCA's Joint International Crime Centre this week on the 12th of December. And he appeared at Westminster's Magistrate Court, where he was remanded into custody. So obviously the next step will be...
Well, the next stage, I mean, he tends to come forward for, it'll probably be a very brief hearing about...
They present a book of evidence to him?
Presumably something along those lines. But I mean, these things, they seem to move quicker in the UK, don't they?
They do, definitely. They go through the courts much more efficiently.
Yeah, I mean, a case like that in Ireland, you'd be looking at sort of a year and a half or something like that. So
and look at the North.
Yeah.
4 years before they could ever...
Exactly. So he'll come before then. But we've seen of that crew, if you want... people like Lee Cullen, I think, got 21 years for sort of weapons offences. Then obviously Bomber, 21 years. So there's very hefty sentences for organised crime offences in the UK. Obviously, imagine he's going to plead not guilty.
He was arrested. Of course, he was even the last kind of more recent past, he was living in Dubai.
Yeah.
Because I think he got wind that the NCA were after him or they were
Yeah.
investigating him. So he moved to Dubai thinking he was safe, but so arrogant and so whatever that he travelled back to Mallorca for a holiday last June to see his family.
Yeah.
Certainly the extended Byrne Kavanagh families and Mr. Nobody and various others always holidayed there, Mallorca, over the summer in a particular month. Perhaps that was June. And he was eating with his family in a restaurant in Al Qudiyah when he was arrested and put into custody. So that wasn't a great idea to come back.
No, there was obviously a warrant out from the UK, but what we were hearing at the time was that he seemed to believe that that he wasn't a wanted man, and seemed to have been on the lookout for this European arrest warrant. But obviously, it's slightly different from the UK. Whether that's arrogance or he seems to have flown in a kind of indirect way. I'm not sure if there was discussion about a passport at the time, but. He was arrested, and that he has been in prison ever since, or in a sort of remand prison in Spain. Looked quite tanned coming back, but he probably won't see much sun now for a good while.
Of exercise time. You'd wonder what relations are like between the Byrne Kavanagh crew and the Kinahans. I mean, the Byrne Kavanagh crew have been destroyed since the Regency Hotel and since the crackdown on the wider organisation. Their overlords in the Kinahan organisation are still free in Dubai. It must bring in a little bit of a sense of jealousy or abandonment or something like that.
Well, when you're looking back on that time of 2017, like they were working very much hand in hand, weren't they, at that stage?
They were kind of like the Kavanagh Byrnes, we'd say, were kind of the Ireland, UK franchises or cell structures of the Kinahan organisation.
But I mean, Daniel and Bomber at that stage really were sharing resources, guns, men, whatever. But the Byrne organised crime group came out of it way worse, didn't they?
Yeah, they did, yeah.
I mean, there's certainly the most senior figures like Pater Keating, Declan Brady, Mr. Nobody, and all of those associated with them are all behind bars.
And that's because they were based here and based in the UK. The Kinahans moved outside the arm of the law to Dubai, to the Emirates, where they got refuge, basically.
But if you look at the core Irish guys who remained personally loyal to Daniel, and people like Ross Browning, Gary Finnegan, Barry Finnegan, people like that we've named over and over again. I mean, very few of them have ended up in prison, where even people like we were speaking about, Liam Brannigan and Dean Howe, who of course because they were working hand in hand, were interconnected with with Daniel Kinahan, but they were all originally Byrne men, really, weren't they? I mean, they're cousins and all of that. So, I mean, certainly the core group around Daniel, a lot of them which were from the North Inner City, they aren't serving the same prison sentences. And we always heard there's a big level of personal animosity between Liam Byrne and Daniel Kinahan at this stage in particular. Bomber Kavanagh and Christie Senior obviously seem to have had a very long-term association way back to the 90s, but certainly after the Regency, while they worked together and were hand in hand at some point, that certainly has come to an end, I think, at this stage.
Yeah, those NCA investigations seem to be very thorough, and of course they are making huge use of the EncroChat information over the past couple of years. Pity we couldn't have followed them a little bit more. All right, I'm going to stop talking about that.
Well, you can talk about it. Yeah. Is it because that's New Year's resolution?
No, I have other New Year's resolutions, but I'm not going to share them with you.
No, pay for your coffee.
Ever,
Pay for your coffee anyway.
I'm going to go down and pay for that coffee now in SuperValue, or I'll go in tomorrow.
Okay.
I promise you, SuperValue. I didn't mean to do that.
It could be getting CCTV in the front of the
I've admitted it. I've put my hands up. There has to be mitigating circumstances with that.
You'll get a bit of all for good behaviour, mate.
Yeah, be followed around shops from here on in. Right, thanks.
Thanks, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.